1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. As usual, I am your host, Joe Mahaffey, and for 2 episodes in a row, I have nailed that. I just want to point that out, James, Joe. That I have gotten that right twice
Nicely
now.
done.
I am on my way. As usual, my partner in crime,
James Engelhardt. Good to be here. It's a sunny early afternoon, and it's nice to be inside talking with you, Joe.
Yeah, here
we have a guest.
We do have a guest. So I want to set this up right because the last 2 episodes, we have been talking about the OGL. And when we first started talking about it, the OGL had just blown up and become a real mess. The last time we were here, we had the opportunity to speak with Christina Stiles from Christina Stiles Presents and talk about the impact of what was going on in the OGL on the third-party publisher, the independent person, and what that might mean for their livelihood. And one of the comments that I made during that episode was that there were a number of YouTubers out there that were really using this opportunity to create a crisis that creates clickbait, but that there were a few adults in the room. And one of those adults in the room, from my point of view, is Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft. And we are so happy to have the professor himself, Professor Dungeon Master, here with us today. Hello, Professor. How are you, sir?
Terrific. It's great to be here, Joe, James.
So, as we've been looking at this, obviously, since we last spoke with Christina, a lot has happened. Hasbro has come out and done what I'll just call their corporate mea culpa. They have moved the OGL into the Creative Commons, and they have said, "Kumbaya, let us all get along in peace once again." But I think the only reason, in my opinion, that we got here, and we'll talk about what we think here is and what it means for the future a little bit later, but I think one of the main reasons that we got here is because people like yourselves in the community, when I say we're the adults in the room, I don't mean that from the context of everybody saying settle down and let's not panic about this. I think it was really more in the standpoint of don't get scared. This is really where we are, and this is really how we express ourselves without being chaotic. In fact, I thought your video where you really called out the way you talk to the people at Hasbro, if you were addressing them in terms of politeness and professionalism, really went a long way, I thought, in the way that people perhaps address their surveys. But before we get into all of that, I just want to kind of get it from your perspective as this thing was happening in real time. What was going through your mind, and how did you kind of think through the content structures that you were going to put out while this was happening?
What was going through my mind is I had to make content as fast as possible because it was changing on a daily basis. And if I spent, sometimes I spend a week on a video, and if I spent that long, whatever I would have taped would have been over. So I was doing 3 videos a week, I think. I just wanted to get it out as fast as possible, and I was also trying to make sure it was accurate, and I wasn't going off rumor and innuendo, because I know that if you have to backtrack, people will call you out.
Yeah, we saw that and I thought he did a fine job with it, D&D Shorts, when he realized he had kind of overstepped his bounds. He was able to walk it back, which gave him some credibility, because I think a lot of folks kind of let that stuff sort of exist in the ether and really didn't do much about it.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say is I was really amazed as this was transpiring. See, I've always been sort of like a counterculture, kind of underground D&D homebrew kind of guy. And I've been critical of WotC and for a long time. I said, this is what they're doing. This is the virtual tabletop. And what I was surprised at is that you had so many YouTubers like D&D Shorts. I never would have expected just everybody everyone came together. And in my opinion, risked a lot more than I did. Somebody like a D&D Shorts or the Dungeon Dudes or Ginny D, they're risking more.
Oh, sure.
They've always been super pro D&D. And I was amazed. I was just gobsmacked that everybody was on the same page. And thinking of the small creators, many of whom their livelihood depends on that OGL. So I'm really proud of the community and what they did.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, not only to see that unpack on the YouTube channels and obviously some of the other social channels like Twitter. I travel a lot for my real life job, and in any city I go into, I always seek out the local game store. And during the month of January, I've had an opportunity to get to a few others that are not my local one, and it was really interesting to see the consistency of sentiment from store to store about how this was impacting the community. And I think that's one of the things that I think, from my perspective, Hasbro doesn't get, in the sense that they think Dungeons and Dragons players and Magic players are the same kind of thing, and you cannot monetize those different crowds in the same way, from my perspective. So I think their reactions to it was sort of indicative of that from my point of view.
I agree. And they're two totally different games, and they're very different from video games.
Oh, absolutely.
Dungeons and Dragons especially, which is not going to stop them from their BTT.
So one of the things I really liked is you went through one of your videos that talked about, it was more the rhetorical video where you talked about some of the arguments. And what I really liked about that particular video is that when I went to do the survey, it really helped frame up in my mind the way I wanted to articulate things and draw back to why they shouldn't give up on the OGL. In fact, I copy and pasted everything I put into the survey just in case, for whatever reason, I had a glitch, because the first time I tried to use it, the browser broke and it wouldn't let me back in. So I had to get back in and try it a different way. And I was trying to use very cogent arguments that say, look, we really understand what's going on here. You can't, this is an irrevocable document. And I don't know if I would have been as articulate with that had it not been for the way you got me thinking about it. That's probably a better way to say it, the way you got me thinking about it. And I really appreciated that.
Thank you. That's a very nice compliment. That's what I try to do. I teach rhetorical analysis and communications, and that's my field. So I think it's important to, when you're arguing, you choose the right words, or you're trying to persuade someone. You have to choose the correct words, and you don't want to offend them.
Sure.
And you don't want to come across as offensive, and you want to separate the people from the corporation, what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's really fair, because there are really a lot of good people inside of Wizards of the Coast, and Hasbro. I'm sure I'm more familiar with the personalities around WotC, just because of the hobby I'm interested in. But it's interesting. So they moved through to the 27th when Kyle Brink finally came out and announced the changes that would not take place with the OGL and how they were moving it to Creative Commons, and that was around the time of your video. We win, Wizard surrenders. So, from your perspective, as somebody who's a content creator, as somebody who is also a YouTube influencer, what was your reaction to their move into Creative Commons, and what do you think where are we today, and where does this go, in your opinion?
That's a big question. So where the initial part, like what was my initial reaction?
Yeah, let's start there. I'm sorry, I'm Mr. General here.
My initial reaction was, it was a Friday. I had already done 5 videos in a week.
Jeez.
I put up 2 of them. And I said to my wife, I canceled one of my weekly Dungeons and Dragons games. I have 3 of them. And I said, let's just go out. Let's go out and celebrate, because my YouTube silver play button had arrived.
I saw that.
And I thought my son and I, we opened it, and we were going to shoot a video with us just opening it, which we did. I said, thank you. And the idea was, let me just put this aside. I'll edit it tomorrow. We'll put it up for the patrons tomorrow. and we're going to take off. I'm finally going to rest. And literally, as we turned off the camera, my phone started buzzing from my trademark attorney, who sent me the
Wow.
article that said, we won. It was from Polygon.
Wow.
And then I said to myself, uh-oh, now I got to do another video. Now I got to do another video right away. Now it's the fastest video. The video that you mentioned was the fastest video I've ever made. It was less than an hour, and it was up.
That's great. That's great.
So, I was surprised. I had, in my mind, I was prepared for it to take a long time. So I was really surprised, and I think it has to do with the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the primary concern, is the movie, and that's why they capitulated so quickly. Where it goes, I couldn't say, because it's never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when we play Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game, we really don't know what the whole community is doing, what they're doing at their tables. And I don't know how people are feeling. I am on Twitter. It seems they're still angry. So.
That's still a subset, I think, just because of where Twitter is these days. But yeah, I think that's fair.
But so we'll see.
Well,
one of the questions I had sort of thinking about all of this is this going to be sort of frozen with 5e and backwards? Are they thinking about doing something different with 1D&D? Is that going to be a different enough animal that they're going to feel that they can say, well, that's that. This is our new thing. We're going to make this other side more digital, and that you can't touch. I had some just random speculations in my head, which is where these things happen.
My feeling is that everything that they're doing with 1D&D, including the playtest, is geared toward a virtual tabletop. That's where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's monthly subscription fees, or if you want to play an elf, you got to pay a few more cents. Or if you want to, choose to be a purple tiefling or a blue tiefling, that's another 50 cents. I don't know. But everything that they're doing is built toward that virtual tabletop. They're hell-bent on it. And I don't think they're really concerned with a tabletop in-person community. Is my personal opinion.
And do you think that misses the mark? I do.
Joe, not one to bury the lead.
Yeah, sorry. I don't do this for
It's hard to say. It does for me.
Yeah.
It does for the people I play with, even young people, even people as young as 12 years old. They want to play D&D in person.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I can imagine a separate game. I can imagine a hybrid game that just goes in a different direction, has a totally different audience. I really don't know. I really couldn't say.
Well, and that was kind of at the core of my question to begin with too, is the OGL for the tabletop, and then you find the different way to monetize by skinning and all kinds of different things that you do with the VTT. And it feels like the woman who came from the PlayStation side of things, feels like those fingerprints are all over it.
Yeah, the Williams.
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
from Xbox.
Yep.
What I know about Wizards of the Coast, what I believe is it's a lot like a Dilbert cartoon, where you have the designers here, people in the middle, like Chris Cow, and then you have Cynthia Williams, and I could believe she has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I think the way she talks about it in the public, not thinking that the communities listen to what is said, is an interesting approach. But from my perspective, I see the humans species has always used oral tradition from the very beginning of time, and I think D&D is a great manifestation of collaborative storytelling, and that's why I think the table, being around the table physically, is so important. I mean, the pandemic has forced us to play games like this. You know, James and I live in a different city, so we do use Zoom and we do use Roll20 in our personal game, but the table is really not the thing. The story is still being told by the people around the virtual table in that sense. And I think that with, you know, when we can get back, as we get back in person, I can't get James to move to the city for some strange reason.
So weird.
But there are other players, you know, it's a very different experience. And I think that that's what people crave, is they create that human connection. So I think you're right. I think it could be a different market. I just don't know how viable that market is given the investment that they've made, because they paid a boatload for D&D Beyond. And I think, you know, and Adam Bradford and those guys, they were very smart. They cashed out, and now he's over doing his next thing with the Nexus. And it's going to benefit Pathfinder in a very similar way. So it'll just have to see how it comes about. But I just don't think that if they left it the way it is, I think it's a valuable tool for the way that people like to play. Because even when you have a collaborative group around the table, I see people with iPads all the time using their character sheets and doing that instead of paper. And I think there's viability to that. But anyway, I know that we're kind of prognosticating on what might be, but I think that, you know, from the perspective of where we are and where we think it goes, I've seen a number of YouTubers speculate that it's still not over, that there's another shoe to drop. What are your thoughts on that?
I generally think things are, you know, Occam's razor. It's the simplest explanation is generally the truth, and lack of communication, overreach, and another shoe to drop. I can't imagine what it would be, but the trust is certainly gone, right? We have Cobalt Press running, you know, they're going ahead with Project Black Flag, and Paizo is going ahead with the Orc, and people are moving on. People have quickly retrofitted their games so they don't infringe in any way Wizards material, and I think that you're going to continue to see that. It's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for third-party creators. It made them aware of the potential vulnerability of this big company changes their mind. I don't think that it's going to go back to the way it was anytime soon.
Do you think that the goodwill is completely gone and irrecoverable?
I don't know. I think that what they were always doing, and this is why the Dungeons & Dragons movie is so important. I don't think it's important to players. You know, every once in a while I do an episode on this movie,
right?
And they never track well. I just don't. You know, they just don't get that many views. I don't think anyone's really interested in this movie, but it's very important to them, because what they're after is, they're not after our generation. They're not after the Ginny D generation. They're after kids right now who are 12.
Yeah, they're after my daughter, who is 14 and has a little group that she runs. So yeah.
So there is a feeling like Hasbro, like we already have this audience. Let's go after this bit broader audience that may be out there. And that's what that movie is for. So they don't really need the goodwill. If they have create a totally different audience, they don't need the goodwill of anyone. It's a flawed strategy, but that's, I think, what they're thinking.
Yeah, well, that tracks.
Well, what's the old Samuel Clemens, or at least it's attributed to Samuel Clemens, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Seems like we've been down this path before with Dungeons and Dragons with different owners, and well, even the same owner with.
Well, I was going to say this feels very much like TSR in the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
The Bloom brothers getting, you know, Gygax maneuvering around them, and then the former publisher coming in and sort of changing the world and not really understanding what she was doing either. So,
Well,
Yeah,
no, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think there are some differences. Having just read, and I recommend to everybody, Slaying the Dragon. I think that there's no question the Bloom brothers just had no background at all in business, and Lorraine Williams, it was the wrong business.
Mm-hmm.
And Cynthia Williams has been thrown in there. I think this situation is a lot more like Pathfinder. It's the 4th edition Pathfinder thing. That's the parallel I see, where this company has total dominance and they've just created their main competitor.
Got it.
That's how I see it.
And the thing is, it was an unforced error. They could have left it alone and they'd have been fine. People would be hyping up the movie, the influencers that are now ignoring it. And it would be moving in that direction. It was just really an unnecessary move in my mind. But the other thing,
I can see it from a corporate level as being we need to make things better for, claw back some of the stuff. And again, this feels like early D&D as well, and like, we're going to start suing everybody who puts D&D on their stuff so that we can, and so they overreact and play it badly. And yeah, it's just fascinating to watch. And I think, Professor, you're right about the way that this is how you create your biggest competitor yet again by accident. Yeah.
Well,
yes, I agree that that part of it is like TSR. Like, let's get litigious and just that was like TSR, and it goes to show you that there's no memory there at that company. And think about it with the OGL. These are people, all the people that were 40 years old and making the decisions, even at Hasbro, once they bought it in 2004 or whenever. Now they're retired. And you have a generation that does not remember either TSR or Hasbro's acquisition of the, Wizards. Yeah. They have no idea who Peter Atkinson is. And that's how you have these problems.
Yeah. Well, James and I come in it from two different perspectives. My parents were happy for me to buy the books. James had to go hide that he bought the books. We were from that.
I was survived the satanic panic by going underground, literally playing in my friend's basement. So yeah.
But when you find yourself as the number one contributor to profits, which Wizards of the Coast did, I think that's, obviously there is the business side of this, and Hasbro is not doing well at the moment when you look at it. I mean, everything I've seen. In fact, that was the interesting thing for me throughout this whole crisis, was watching not only what the YouTubers were doing, but watching how long did it take the mainstream stock press to start talking about it? When finally it hit the Washington Post, it was about a 7-day period between the time it hit YouTube and the time it finally started hitting the mainstream press. And I was waiting for some of the shareholders to get kind of riled about it. And there were a few hedge funds that finally started speaking up too. So I'm sure that there was once the chorus begins to come at you from multiple directions, I'm sure that was a big part of it. But there was one aspect to this, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. I'm just going to say it. And if you want to comment it, I'll leave that up to you. But I was very curious about the folks over at Critical Role, because I remember distinctly when they did the Wendy's one shot, and then found out that Wendy's was the one fast food joint that didn't support a union that helped the people picking the lettuce and tomatoes, that they dropped that like a hot potato, and the communities rose up, and boom, it was over with. They scrubbed it from their video feeds and everything. Although I downloaded the game before all that happened, so I still have it somewhere. But then in fact, I even tweeted, I was very surprised that the Critical Role that took that kind of action was just so quiet. And I'm sure it's contractual. I'm sure that they've got something in their agreement that says thou shalt not disparage. I get it. But it's really been interesting. The interviews I've seen where Matt Mercer's out there, he's always got Marisha next to him. I know they're married, but I also know she's the marketing and communications person, and she answers all the questions. So I'm just, I'm kind of curious to see how the fallout from this works for them, because they are, the biggest brand outside of D&D right now. and they have the ability to create their own system. They have the ability to create their own content. And I'll just be curious to see where they'll go and what they'll say and what they'll do once certain things expire for them. That was just kind of interesting for me because they were sometimes the loudest voice.
Here's my take. 100% they're working on their own game system. And I will offer my title is Mercer and Monsters. It's nice and alliterative. It's easy to remember. But there's no question they are working on their own game system. And why wouldn't they?
No, that's fair. Do you get a vest when you get your DM screen?
I don't know, but they're definitely that's where they're going. There's no question.
Yeah, that's fair. Go ahead, James. Sorry.
No. I was just agreeing. I had to negotiate the family pet here. So
yeah, James has a cat and a toddler back there that sometimes bleeds into our discussions, and so that's typically where that happens. Well, I got to tell you, so I was at the friendly local game store yesterday. I was painting with some friends, somebody Professor. Christina Stiles, she was on last time, and then my wife was in there learning mahjong with some friends, which we thought was fun to bring mahjong into the magic shop and let that sit next to each other and see what that looked like for a discussion. But what was really interesting is I was observing people coming in and out of the store, and I saw more D&D starter sets and essential sets go out the door yesterday, and even a 3-pack of the player's guide, the monster manual, and the DM's guide. And in all instances, they were little kids, like sub 10 years old, and their parents coming in to get that. And I thought that was really interesting that, it's like, to a degree, crisis averted. People are buying the stuff. Now, I asked Rob, the owner of our friendly local game store, Carolina Tabletop Games, not a sponsor, but I always like to mention him because he's a good friend. No Paizo material because it's all sold out. I put on the Discord channel, and I'll put it in the show notes. There's a Humble Bundle going on right now where you can get a lot of digital Paizo content and get engaged in the game if you're interested in that. And then when I put that in the Discord, I promised Rob I'd also buy a copy when it came into a store because I don't like doing that. They could cannibalize his sales. But anyway, it's just interesting to see that the TTRPG is just rolling forward. It's just going to roll forward the way it does. And as for me, I'll always stay around a table. So anyway,
I think probably the biggest beneficiary of this is Paizo.
Oh yeah.
I think their whole warehouse, I think that print run is sold out. Won't even be back in print for 6 months.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think you were talking about the parallels earlier between Pathfinder and D&D in the past, and now D&D as opposed to creating their biggest competitor have just given it jet fuel and lots of it.
Yeah, because I think
that's interesting.
They were primed with 2E. There was a lot of people that didn't like 2E, but they were also primed for 2E to make it more accessible, which is what I think 5E did. And I think that this is going to be that catalyst for sure.
I think if anything could be said to be the weakness of Pathfinder 2, it's the fact that some people thought it was too much like D&D. And now that is a strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've played both, right? And so it's easy enough to jump back and forth. You don't hardly need to shift your head all that much, the headspace to, make that transition.
Says the person who's not the DM. I got to go figure out all the rules.
Yeah, well, that's
But it's nice because I am also a follower of DM Dave. I like a lot of his content, and he's now becoming Henceforth Games. He's changing his whole piece, but they also have some really nice tie-ins to Foundry VTT, and I think Foundry VTT along with Pathfinder, that's going to be a nice vehicle, and it will be interesting to see what Adam Bradford's Nexus product is going to look like once it's fully baked for the Pathfinder community, because I think those kinds of tools will not only allow, I think the kerfuffle, as I also call it, will also allow Paizo to compete at a very competitive level in the regular space. But I think these other things are also going to give whatever Hasbro does with their VTT a run for their money, from my point of view. So,
yeah, and those tools, those are the kinds of tools that like my 14-year-old relies on. It's all of the sort of extra searchable, click here and it kind of does the math for you behind the scene. You don't have to run through all the books, and that makes her very happy. And I think there's a lot of teens and through like my students as well who find that much more amenable than to having a stack of, I see the paper behind you there. And I think what you're saying, Joe, kind of will be the next important step for Pathfinder, is having that kind of resource for that generation. And if Pathfinder's in a good space to do that, by the time the D&D movie comes out, I can't imagine that Gen Z is super brand loyal at this point, right? At this point, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm like, yeah, let's just D&D. Let's just go back and do that because I got that. I've been playing that since I was 14. So, but the 16-year-old, they don't have that kind of, they'll go with whatever's easiest and seems fun. And if they just, as long as they get to roll dice to blow shit up, they'll be happy.
That's fair. Well, Professor Dungeon Master, James and I both really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us today and kind of talk through this. I think this is as I said last week, James and I are not content creators. We just like to play the game, and we appreciate the people like Christina and others that create a lot of content, and we like the people, and we appreciate the people that keep this game accessible to everybody. And so we appreciate, the content that you create, continue to create, and how you have an impact on the game that we love so much. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for watching Dungeon Craft. I really appreciate everybody.
Yeah, I can confirm I have been a subscriber for at least a year for sure, because I think it's when I discovered you was about a year ago.
Thank you.
And we will include a link to your main channel page in our show notes, so that people who haven't found you yet, I can't imagine that's possible with your 110,000 followers and our 10. But no, all kidding aside, to make it easy for folks to find you. And so James and I typically go through the rest of this and talk about some other things. You're welcome to stay, or if you need to go on with the rest of your day, we certainly appreciate it.
Now we can talk. Are we talking board games?
We're talking board games.
Yeah.
So,
I'll stay.
Oh, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So James and I, when we finish this segment, we generally talk about what's been on our table since the last time we spoke, which was 2 weeks ago. So James, as always, I will let you go first, sir.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see here. It's been a pretty slow a couple of weeks. There has been, with the toddler in the house, it's a vector of disease, and so it comes and goes. And there's been a lot of, you have that history, you understand. So yeah, that happens. So we had a couple of just basic games where it's like, we both feel terrible, but let's just do something that's not just staring at a screen. And so Laura and I sat down and played Quirkle Cubes, which is a fun, version of Quirkle. It's you can get Quirkle everywhere. It's a pretty basic little pattern matching game, super fun, nice to do when you don't really have a lot of other energy. And then we played two games of the game. One night we lost very badly, and the game, Joe and Professor, you guys know this one, the card game. And it's one of the things I also teach a little bit of rhetorical analysis, and it's a game that I like to bring out for my students, because the first version of the game is this black box with a red sort of melting skull on it, and these numbers in this sort of metal font kind of thing. And when I first got the game, I'm like, well, this is a super cute, fun, cooperative game. Why the hell does it look like this? And about, 6 months, a year later, they came out with this flowers and mushrooms and very kind of abstract design. And now you can get it in Target or Walmart or just wherever. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I show my students, like, this is what it came out with originally. This is what they changed it to. Like, oh, yeah. Okay. So we ended up losing one game and then winning the next. And it's always a wonderful feeling when you get to win this little co-op. And then I had some fun. Speaking of uh, all things WotC, I guess. So Soulforge Fusion is coming out, which is a weird sort of, former digital game that they made into a now tabletop version. It's Richard Garfield, who brought us Magic the Gathering and then tried to atone for his sins by doing Keyforge, right? And but then I think Keyforge was kind of one, it's the very fun algorithmically driven cards, right? So you have these very unique decks based on these algorithms, and they also have algorithmically generated names, which I guess apparently from time to time early on there were some sort of very sketchy words that got into the names of some of these decks, and there's a whole kerfuffle, if you will, Joe, about that early on as well. But the thing about Keyforge is that you couldn't customize the decks at all, right? So you just bought the deck, and so it solved the rich boy problem, right? Whoever had the most money had the best Magic deck, and they would win. And so Keyforge solved that by saying, no, you just have this deck that you can play. And Soulforge is kind of a going back, and so it's this hybrid game where you get two half decks and any two half decks, and you combine them and play it. And it's a little fussier, I think, than Keyforge, and also participates in this new genre version of things where you don't have rules in the box either, and you go to their website and you try to. Oh, and it was a very bad. Laura listened to me say many swear words in order and in algorithmically generated phrases, and so I don't know. We had a good time when we finally got it figured out and playing it. Laura was like, I don't think I'm going to like this. This doesn't feel like my jam. And then about halfway through, I noticed her like leaning forward and really kind of thinking about stuff, and it was super fun. So so interesting first kind of a mixed positive initial reaction. We'll play it some more and see what I get for final thoughts on that after a couple more plays.
And Professor Dungeon Master, just for us as being a relatively new podcast, this will be episode number 17 for us. This is the first time a game just showed up. Neither of us ordered this game, so we don't really know if it was an accident or if they actually sent it to us, but they didn't bother to tell us why. So that's how James ended up looking at that game. Well,
and then you have a bunch of stuff that looks like that was hitting your table.
Yeah, we had a few things. I think we played Basilica a little bit further, and just for Professor Dungeon Master's edification. So, in the friendly local game store in Pineville, there's a much larger podcast in town called Rolling Dice and Taking Names, and those gentlemen had invited the designer of Basilica to stay with them for a while when he was touring the States, and so we got to see it play tested. The reprint play tested at the store, so I bought a copy of it. It's a nice head-to-head 2-player game, and my wife and I like it a lot, which is interesting because it's one of those games where you actually can be mean to each other if you have to win, and my wife doesn't like games where you have to be mean to each other to win. So we played that a little bit longer, and then we have, as you can imagine, with the obsessive compulsive problems that we have, a Shelf of Shame, which is a game still in the shrink wrap that we've never played. And so finally, after about a year, Aqua Garden finally made it to the table, and that is a delightful game. I got to say, the mechanic on it. Actually, it's interesting. They have a 2-player mechanic very similar to Dog Park, where you add this third meeple in there to kind of create a barrier. But in terms of the theme, it's great. And then also because of the way that you have to sort of solve a puzzle, you think it's going to be really easy. But then as you begin to start solving the puzzle, you realize it's very hard because each of your tanks in your aquarium, you're actually building an aquarium in town. That's Aqua Garden. Each of the tanks in your aquarium, and there are 6, only have a 4 value of oxygen, and your fish take away the oxygen in the water, and you can put things in to add it back, but only so much. And so it becomes a real resource management, thinking ahead, how to play game, and it's very well balanced. Dale and I have both taken turns winning the game. Not, we either one or the other has won, and our scores were maybe 4 to 6 points apart. So it's really well balanced. Nobody's running away with it. You have a shot up until the end of the game. And there's different, I wouldn't call it a point salad, but there's different ways that you can bolster it with bonuses at the end. And I think that it was just a big surprise. And we have some of the expansions for this game, and it's a Japanese design game. I'm going to blow this name completely wrong. The designer is Totsuka Chow, or the last name is spelled Chuo. I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure I said that wrong. Please do not send me hate mail. But we love the game a lot. And then I think I told you.
It looks like a fairly small box for all the activity that's going on.
It's a small box, but it expands big. A lot of nice wooden meeples. They do a nice job. The publisher has done a really nice job. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I will put it in the show notes below. Aqua Garden. We actually have a couple of the sequels, because I got it as part of a Kickstarter that my friend Grace, we have this rule. If she backs a Kickstarter, she tells me, and if I think it looks interesting, I'll back it, and vice versa. So that's kind of how I got it. But it just took a while to get on the table. And then the last thing is, I think we have a friend of the show. He's a police officer here in Charlotte. He and his wife have adopted some lovely young ladies from China that are both special needs in their own way. I'll leave it there. They were hoping at some point that they could expose their daughters to Mahjong. And it just so happens that from our church, we have a couple of friends that one is from Indonesia, and the other one's just traveled a lot and has played a lot of Mahjong. So we got them all together at the store yesterday to learn Mahjong, and that's that whole Mahjong versus magic thing. So that was really kind of cool to begin that process. And of course, as you can imagine, it's not a one-off kind of thing and you're done, because there's so much nuance to that game. And there's an American version versus a Chinese version. I won't get into all that. But my wife got to play that. I didn't play it, but my wife got to play it. And so that was I wanted to include that just because I love the story behind that. But up next for us is we're going to this is a more recent shrink wrapped one, but it is Wonderland's War.
Oh, yeah. I've heard very good things about that. I'd be very interested to hear how that plays.
Our goal is to get it out. We have some friends that maybe demystified it a little bit for us, so we're going to see.
Okay.
Professor, what about in your world? Do you have any other games that don't involve tabletops that you've been playing?
Yeah, we're big board gamers in this family, and especially my wife. And there are 3 that we've been playing over the last 6 weeks. Cat in a Box, which is a trick-taking game. That is very popular amongst my friends, and also my nieces and nephews, where you don't get to see the color on the card. And that is super easy to pick up. It's a lot of fun. So Cat in a Box we've been playing that quite a bit. I still love Wingspan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I could play Wingspan forever. And I just got one of the expansions for that.
Was it Asia?
Yeah, that's the one. And I don't know if we've opened it yet, but I could play Wing, and I'm not good at it. But I think my wife is tired of it because she doesn't win.
Oh.
My daughter used to always beat us, and now that my daughter moved to a different state recently, so we're playing by ourselves, and I always just edge my way about. But I'm fascinated with Wingspan. I could play it forever. And
so if it is the Asia expansion, it's got the duet mode for just the 2-player game. That's really, really quite intriguing.
Okay, so we got to definitely.
Yeah,
I think we've gotten that out of the shrink wrap. I'm gonna have to tell her that. We'll do that tonight.
Yeah.
because I'm just a nut about Wingspan. I think that when I go to like Gen Con, I'll probably play that more than Dungeons and Dragons. I could play forever.
I love that. That's one of our favorite games.
And there's another new game. I don't know if it's on Kickstarter now, but I've gotten an advanced copy. I know Bloat Games is selling at conventions. It's called Play, Rewind, Eject. It's a very simple game. It's a list of movies. It's a party game, and you get these cards, and you bet. You get 3 movies, and the person whose turn it is, you have to bet whether they would play this movie, like they think it's perfect. Would they rewind it, which means you reboot it with a different cast, or would you eject it? All right, so you might get Usual Suspects, Titanic, and Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. And it's great because this is a game that just like anyone can play at a party, and it leads to interesting conversations about what people think are their favorite films, and who didn't see The Godfather. So, yeah. Play, Rewind, Eject by Bloat Games is great. I know my daughter's played it with her friends. I've played with my friend. It's just very light if people are looking for something that maybe for non-gamers too, because it's really a conversation starter, but it's a nice little game.
Nice. And that you said Bloat Games, and that's available now or coming soon?
I got it at a convention. I think it's available.
Okay.
I think it's available, or he was kickstarting it, or he's kickstarting.
I'll look. I like to. Our MO is we take the BGG sheet for each of the games and we put them in our show notes. So I'll see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll find the Kickstarter or the Game Found and put it in there. That sounds great.
I like that it still feels like it's got kind of that 80s, 90s VCR kind of language to it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, we're big Wingspan fans. Also, we were able to actually teach that to my in-laws. We were in Colorado on a 2-week trip, and of course, I took an ATA approved case full of games, and we taught them Wingspan, and it was such a delightful trip, and they liked the game so much. I don't know if you know this, but Natalie Rojas sells those prints of the cards, of the artwork, and so I have a daughter named Maggie, and we kept seeing magpies all over Colorado, so that became a thing because that's what we called her when she was a child. And so we got my in-laws the prints of those birds and framed them for Christmas as a memorial or remembrance of that trip, which was kind of cool. But it's just what Elizabeth Hargraves has done with that whole ecosystem, along with the folks over there at Stonemeyer Games, is just absolutely great. But for us, when my wife and I play Mariposas, she can't win at Mariposas, which is another Hargraves game. If you haven't checked that one out and you like Wingspan, I think you'll like that as well.
Okay.
So board games in the news. There was a big announcement this week. Did you see this, James?
I was going to say, speaking of Stonemeyer Games.
Yeah, I think I don't know if he surprised me. I'll leave it there. With this, I guess a sequel to Scythe, the Expeditions game, due out in July. That was a pretty interesting drop on that. The video was pretty neat as well. I don't know if you...
Yeah, no, that definitely caught my attention. I kickstarted Scythe the first time around, and it was easy enough to like commit to being a completionist with Scythe because it was like we only have X number of expansions and then we're done. So that was nice. And then he went and did this, and I thought, oh man. But it looks like a nice sort of card-driven, more what's the word I'm looking for here? Modular sort of exploration that sort of builds on the same world look and steampunk vibe that Scythe had, I'm very interested to see how other people find it and when they play it and see what they think. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm like, oh no, more Scythe. But I do love the game. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, what's interesting to me is I love how he calls it a sequel. It's kind of like what they did with Evolution and Oceans. Oceans is a sequel to Evolutions. It's not an expansion, so they stand alone. And I think that there's an intimidation factor of Scythe for some people They see the big box, they see all the mech, they're not really sure, they don't really know how accessible the game is, and this might be a game that kind of leads into that. I don't know. That's just speculation on my part, but I was just kind of glad to see it. I don't know. Professor, did you happen to note that this week?
I did not, but I can tell you now that I have a feeling I know what people are going to be running for at Gen Con.
Yeah, it's a pretty good bet. It's a pretty good bet. Well, that's the only other. I mean, obviously, we could sit here and talk more OGL news, but I think all that's been covered thus far. So that was the most notable thing I caught this since we were last together about board games. As we move on to sort of, I've modified our Kickstarter section to be Kickstarter Game Found for a couple of reasons. Obviously, Game Found is in that business now. And they've got some really interesting titles that are kind of going their way. So we generally call this section Kickstarter, Game Found, Backed, or Intrigued by, or just games I picked up, because, you know, it's a problem. But one thing I have been failing to mention the last couple episodes, because we've been so deep in the weeds on the OGL, is I actually backed my first Kickstarter of the year, and it was totally not a board game.
Oh, what'd you kick?
It is called Pirates and Sailors: A Nightmare at Sea, and it's nothing but STL files. For the professor's edification, I got a resin printer and a PLA printer at Christmas time, and I have been printing. In fact, most of what we were painting yesterday were the resin minis that I printed. And ever since I ran Ghost of the Salt Marsh, I thought, boy, I don't want to buy that ship that WizKids sell, but boy, I'd like to have some boats for the tabletop. And so I thought this was a really inexpensive way. It was like $60. There's only like one area, one tier, if you will. I think there's another tier if you want to license it and print the boats and sell them on Etsy, which I don't really want to do. But it's just the sculpts look really great. The company has done this kind of thing before with different themes. So if you're looking for terrain and stuff like that, I thought it was just an interesting get. And I've got a printer now, so what else to do but print? I have been intrigued by Batman, of course, Escape from Arkham Asylum by Night Games.
Okay.
I haven't backed it for a couple of reasons. Number one, to get the level of buy-in that I would want, I would have to spend money that would be commensurate to what Elden Ring was looking for back at Christmas time. And I'm not interested in doing that. And I did back, which I'll talk about in a second, Harry Potter Catch the Snitch, which is also by Night Games. They also did the Harry Potter's miniature games.
Oh, right, yes.
And it is still not arrived. It's allegedly shipped. But what I'm reading is that the quality of what's coming out of the box, there's some broken pieces and stuff like that I've seen in the chat. But you know, if everything's perfect, people don't jump on and say, hey, everything's perfect. It's usually when there's a problem. So I'm kind of waiting to see until I get my own. But unfortunately, it will arrive after it has ended. So I think it's just a matter of ignoring it. But the sculpts on this thing look amazing. And if they had some stretch goals that once they reached a certain piece, the Penguin sculpt, you had an option to use one that looked like Danny DeVito from the Batman movie. They have one that looks like Michelle Pfeiffer from the Catwoman movie. I mean, they've done a really nice job.
Wow.
Night Models and Night Games are officially licensed by Warner Brothers, so they've got the Harry Potter, they've got the Batman. I've read that they're going to get a Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire kind of thing for their pieces. I just couldn't do it, particularly since right next to it is Andromeda's Edge by Cardboard Alchemy, and it's got some really nice sculpts, and it's a fraction of the price. And some of these sculpts, it's kind of like Star Trek meets Tapestry meets Scythe. It's a really interesting concept for a game. And I'll put those in the show notes there. I'm going to pause and breathe in case either of you want to comment on either of those. Hearing none, go ahead.
You'll notice that Joe is the one that's hitting the Kickstarter a lot harder than I do. That's just how the world works.
Difference is he has a toddler. I don't.
This is a big. It's true.
No, all kidding aside. But I did get the notification that Catch the Snitch is coming out. They're using a logistics distributor out of Poland. And it is shipped. So It is somewhere in customs in Germany right now, I think was the latest I got from FedEx. So it'll probably be here by the end of next week. So I will be able to report, did I get it? What were the sculpts like? And
oh yeah.
And am I kicking myself for going, oh
They
my
want to see
gosh.
the beauty of the damage. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and speaking of Polish games, I was able to pick up a copy of Meadow Downstream. Meadow, if you like Wingspan, Meadow's a great game. And what's interesting for me, the first thing I noticed with Meadow is that it was designed in Poland and it was printed in Poland. And when you get a game that comes from there and you get a game that comes from China, I mean, they're both colorful and they're very nice. It's just different. The feel is different. The quality is different. And we just have loved Meadow. It was one of our favorite games last year. And when I saw that there was an expansion, I just had to get it because when Dale falls in love with a game, you got to keep her going down that path. But I got it through Zadu Games in England because I couldn't find a distributor here in the US. And so it was like €18 plus shipping for the expansion. So $20 plus $10 shipping, something like that. So those are the things that I've gotten. And this is where both of you will look at me with both shame and derision, because I am a collector. And so I did place an order for Keys from the Golden Vault alternative cover through my friendly local game store who will get profit off of it and feed his family.
That's good.
And
I was looking at one of the things that when I was looking at this description of this and looking at it a little bit, and I was remembering looking through some of the professor's videos, and there was the how to run a heist, how to have get characters running across rooftops and this kind of thing. And I was like, oh yeah, nice. Questions I hadn't had, so it was kind of fun to just have this sort of in my life for the last couple of days, looking at that, see this. So.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
That one took a long time to make. With those little miniatures. The Reviled Society Supercut is up now, and it's like all of them together, 40 minutes of them.
Wow.
And those all together, I mean, they took weeks to make, so I appreciate everybody watching them.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of great stuff on that channel, and yeah. Lots of and one of the things I really like about it is it takes a couple of different ways into the hobby, into D&D, into tabletop RPGs, from the crafting to the DMing to the how you just think about these things generally. So it kind of covers bases. Joe and I had this conversation a little while ago that somebody should open a craft store / game store that has like X-Acto knives and hot glue guns and yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I was thinking about that for a second.
No, it's fun, and I think I love the idea of having some one shots that you can throw in and also have some mechanics. But I have to echo what James was saying. What you're doing with your videos, the production values when you're using the minis and stuff is just really amazing. I can imagine just knowing that how hard that is, how much time that takes to do.
A long time.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to the end. As usual, we thank Professor Dungeon Master for being with us this go around. We hope to have other guests coming up. I've got a really good friend who is about to publish her book on tabletop role playing and a psychiatry type of environment, and her book is going to drop in March, and I'm still kind of working out the date with her. So I'll save that and leave that as a teaser, but we'll get that set up. And as usual, we just really appreciate it anytime we can have somebody on and really help our community better understand what's going on, but also just having a nice conversation about things that we're passionate about. So thank you again. And as usual, I am Joe Mahaffey, and I am not bored. I am bored gaming.
And I'm James Engelhardt, hoping that all your tiebreakers break your way.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
I got a new game. It's gonna be great. It's the latest craze of 1988. Got a couple of pencils and a drawing pad. It's gonna be gnarly. Pictionary, put your piece on the board. Pictionary, now what was that word? Pictionary, are this sketch is absurd. Pictionary, I'm drawing a